Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring alien points of view. Earthmen Bearing Gifts by Fredric Brown. They Also Serve by Donald E. Westlake. The God-Plllnk by Jerome Bixby. Rabbits Have Long Ears by Lawrence F. Willard. Master Race by Richard Ashby. Earthmen Bearing Gifts by Fredric Brown. Originally published in Galaxy magazine, June 1960. Narrated by Trussel. Dari sat alone in his room, meditating. From outside the door he caught a thought wave equivalent to a knock, and, glancing at the door, he willed it to slide open. It opened. "Enter, my friend," he said. He could have projected the idea telepathically, but with only 2 persons present, speech was more polite. John Key entered. "You are up late tonight, my leader," he said. "Yes, Key. Within an hour the Earth rocket is due to land, and I wish to see it." "Yes, I know. It will land 1,000 miles away, if their calculations are correct, beyond the horizon. But if it lands even twice that far, the flash of the atomic explosion should be visible. And I have waited long for first contact, for even though no Earthman will be on that rocket, it will still be first contact for them. Of course, our telepath teams have been reading their thoughts for many centuries, but this will be the first physical contact between Mars and Earth." Key made himself comfortable on one of the low chairs. "True," he said. "I have not followed recent reports too closely, though. Why are they using an atomic warhead? I know they suppose our planet is uninhabited, but still—" "They will wash the flash through their lunar telescopes and get what do they call it? A spectroscopic analysis. That will tell them more than they know now, or think they know. Much of it is erroneous, about the atmosphere of our planet and the composition of its surface. It is— call it a sighting shot, Key. They'll be here in person within a few oppositions, and then—" Mars was holding out, waiting for Earth to come. What was left of Mars, that is. This one small city of about 900 beings. The civilization of Mars was older than that of Earth, but it was a dying one. This was what remained of it. One city, 900 people. They were waiting for Earth to make contact, for a selfish reason, and for an unselfish one. Martian civilization had developed in quite different direction from that of Earth. It had developed no important knowledge of the physical sciences, no technology, but it had developed social sciences to the point where there had not been a single crime, let alone a war, on Mars for 50,000 years, and it had developed fully the parapsychological sciences of the mind, which Earth was just beginning to discover. Mars could teach Earth much. How to avoid crime and war, to begin with. Beyond those simple things lay telepathy, telekinesis, empathy. And Earth would, Mars hoped, teach them something even more valuable to Mars. How? By science and technology, which it was too late for Mars to develop now, even if they had the type of minds which would enable them to develop these things. to restore and rehabilitate a dying planet so that an otherwise dying race might live and multiply again. Each planet would gain greatly, and neither would lose. And tonight was the night when Earth would make its first sighting shot. Its next shot, a rocket containing Earthmen, or at least an Earthman, would be at the next opposition 2 Earth years, or roughly 4 Martian years hence. The Martians knew this, because their teams of telepaths were able to catch at least some of the thoughts of Earthmen, enough to know their plans. Unfortunately, at that distance, the connection was one way. Mars could not ask Earth to hurry its program, or tell Earth scientists the facts about Mars's composition and atmosphere, which would have made this preliminary shot unnecessary. Tonight, Ree, the leader, as nearly as the Martian word can be translated, and Key, his administrative assistant and closest friend, sat and meditated together until the time was near. Then they drank a toast to the future, in a beverage based on menthol, which had the same effect on Martians as alcohol on Earthmen, and climbed to the roof of the building in which they had been sitting. They watched toward the north, where the rocket should land. The stars shone brilliantly and unwinkingly through the atmosphere. In Observatory No. 1 on Earth's moon, Rog Everett, his eye at the eyepiece of the spotoscope, said triumphantly, "There she blew, Willie. And now, as soon as the films are developed, we'll know the score on that old planet Mars." He straightened up. There'd be no more to see now, and he and Willie Sanger shook hands solemnly. It was an historical occasion. "Hope it didn't kill anybody. Any Martians, that is. Rog, did it hit dead center in Syrtis Major?" "Near as matters. I'd say it was maybe 1,000 miles off to the south, and that's damn close on a 50-million-mile shot. Willie, do you really think there are any Martians?" Willie thought a second, and then said, "No." He was right. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. They Also Serve by Donald E. Westlake. Originally published in Analog Science Fact and Fiction, September 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Why should people hate vultures? After all, a vulture never kills anyone. The launch carrying the mails, supplies and replacements eased slowly in towards the base, keeping the bulk of the moon between itself and Earth. Captain Ebor, seated at the controls, guided the ship to the rocky, uneven ground with the easy carelessness of long practice, then cut the drive, got to his walking tentacles, and stretched. Donning his spacesuit, he left the ship to go over to the dome and meet God-Plllnk, the base commander. An open ground car was waiting for him beside the ship. The driver, encased in his spacesuit, crossed tentacles in a sloppy salute, and Ebor returned the gesture quite as sloppily. Here on the periphery, caste formalities were all but dispensed with. Ebor stood for a moment and watched the unloading. The cargo crew, used to working in spacesuits, had one truck already half full. The replacements, unused to spacesuits, and, in addition, awed and a bit startled by the bleakness of this satellite, were moving awkwardly down the ramp. Satisfied that the unloading was proceeding smoothly, Ebor climbed aboard the ground car, awkward in his suit, and settled back heavily in the seat to try to get used to gravity again. The gravity of this moon was slight, of course, barely 1/6 the gravity of the home world or most of the colonies, but it still took getting used to after a long trip in free fall. The driver sat at the controls, and the car jerked into motion. Ebor, looking up, noticed for the first time that the dome wasn't there anymore. The main dome, housing the staff and equipment of the base, just wasn't there. And the driver, he now saw, was aiming the car toward the nearby crater wall. Extending two of his eyes till they almost touched the faceplate of his helmet, he could see activity at the base of the crater wall and what looked like an airlock entrance. He wondered what had caused the change, which had obviously been done at top speed. The last time he'd been here, not very long ago, the dome had still been intact, and there had been no hint of any impending move underground. The driver steered the car into the open airlock, and they waited until the first cargo truck had lumbered in after them. Then the outer door closed, the pumps were turned on, and in a minute the red light flashed over the inner door. Ebor removed the spacesuit gratefully, left it in the car, and walked clumsily through the inner door into the new base. A good job had been done on it, for all the speed. Rooms and corridors had been melted out of the rock, the floors had been carpeted, the walls painted, and the ceiling lined with light panels. All of the furnishings had been transferred here from the original dome, and the result looked, on the whole, quite livable. As livable as the dome had been, at least. But the base commander, God-Plllnk, waiting for his old friend Ebor near the inner door of the lock, looked anything but happy with the arrangement. At Ebor's entrance he raised a limp tentacle in weary greeting and said, "Come in, my friend, come in. Tell me the new jokes from home. I could use some cheering up." "None worth telling," said Ebor. He looked around. "What's happened here?" he asked. "Why have you gone underground? Why do you need cheering up?" God-Plllnk clicked his eyes in despair. "Those things," he cried. "Those annoying little creatures on that blasted planet up there." Ebor repressed an amused ripple. He knew God-Plllnk well enough to know that the commander invariably overstated things. "What have they been up to, Da?" he asked. "Come on, you can tell me over a hot cup of rest now." "I've been practically living on the stuff for the last 2 dren," said God-Plllnk hopelessly. "Well, I suppose another cup won't kill me. Come on to my quarters." "I worked up a fine thirst on the trip," Ebor told him. The two walked down the long corridor together, and Ebor said, "Well, what happened?" "They came here," God-Plllnk told him simply. At Ebor's shocked look, he rippled in wan amusement and said, "Oh, it wasn't as bad as it might have been, I suppose. It was just that we had to rush around so frantically, unloading and dismantling the dome, getting this place ready." "What do you mean, they came here?" demanded Ebor. "They are absolutely the worst creatures for secrecy in the entire galaxy," exclaimed God-Plllnk in irritation. "Absolutely the worst." "Then you've picked up at least one of their habits," Ebor told him. "Now stop talking in circles and tell me what happened." "They built a spaceship, is the long and the short of it," God-Plllnk answered. Ebor stopped in astonishment. "No!" "Don't tell me no!" cried God-Plllnk. "I saw it." He was obviously at his wits' end. "It's unbelievable," said Ebor. "I know," said God-Plllnk. He led the way into his quarters, motioned Ebor to a perch, and rang for his orderly. "It was just a little remote-controlled apparatus, of course," he said. "The fledgling attempt, you know. But it circled this moon here, busily taking pictures, and went right back to the planet again, giving us all a terrible fright. There hadn't been the slightest indication they were planning anything that spectacular." "None?" asked Ebor. "Not a hint?" "Oh, they've been boasting about doing some such thing for ages," God-Plllnk told him. "But there was never any indication that they were finally serious about it. They have all sorts of military secrecy, of course, and so you never know a thing is going to happen until it does." "Did they get a picture of the dome?" "Thankfully, no. And before they had a chance to try again, I whipped everything underground." "It must have been hectic," Ebor said sympathetically. "It was," said God-Plllnk simply. The orderly entered. God-Plllnk told him, "To rest now," and he left again. I can't imagine them making a spaceship, said Ebor thoughtfully. I would have thought they'd blown themselves up long before reaching that stage. I would have thought so too, said Dark-Plllnk, but there it is. At the moment they've divided themselves into 2 camps, generally speaking, that is, and the 2 sides are trying like mad to outdo each other in everything. As a part of it, they're shooting all sorts of rubbish into space and crowing every time a people of the other side's rubbish malfunctions. They could go on that way indefinitely, said Ebor. I know, said Dark-Plllnk gloomily, and here we sit. Ebor nodded, studying his friend. You don't suppose this is all a waste of time, do you? He asked after a minute. Dark-Plllnk shook a tentacle in negation. Not at all, not at all. They'll get around to it sooner or later. They're still boasting themselves into the proper frame of mind, that's all. Ebor rippled in sympathetic amusement. I imagine you sometimes wish you could give them a little prodding in the right direction, he said. Dark-Plllnk fluttered his tentacles in horror, crying, Don't even think of such a thing. I know, said Ebor hastily. The laws. Never mind the laws, snapped Dark-Plllnk. I'm not even thinking about the laws. Frankly, if it would do any good, I might even consider breaking 1 or 2 of the laws, and the devil with my conditioning. You're upset, said Ebor at that. But if we were to interfere with those creatures up there, continued Dark-Plllnk, interfere with them in any way at all, it would be absolutely disastrous. The orderly returned at that point, with 2 steaming cups of Restno. Dark-Plllnk and Ebor accepted the cups, and the orderly left, making a sloppy tentacle cross salute, which the 2 ignored. I wasn't talking necessarily about attacking them, you know, said Ebor, returning to the subject. Neither was I, Dark-Plllnk told him. We wouldn't have to attack them. All we would have to do is let them know we're here. Not even why we're here, just the simple fact of our presence. That would be enough. They would attack us. Ebor extended his eyes in surprise. As vicious as all that? Chilling, Dark-Plllnk told him. Absolutely chilling. Then I'm surprised they haven't blown themselves to pieces long before this. Oh well, said Dark-Plllnk. You see, they're cowards too. They have to boast and brag and shout a while before they finally get to clawing and biting at one another. Ebor waved a tentacle. Don't make it so vivid. Sorry, apologized Dark-Plllnk. He drained his cup of Restno. Out here, he said, living next door to the little beasts day after day, one begins to lose one's sensibilities. Well, it has been a long time, agreed Ebor. Longer than we had originally anticipated, Dark-Plllnk said frankly. We've been ready to move in for I don't know how long, and instead we just sit here and wait, which isn't good for morale either. No, I don't imagine it is. There's already a theory among some of the workmen that the blow-up just isn't going to happen, ever. And since that ship went circling by, of course, morale has hit a new low. It would have been nasty if they'd spotted you, said Ebor. Nasty, echoed Dark-Plllnk. Catastrophic, you mean? All that crowd up there needs is an enemy, and it doesn't much matter to them who that enemy is. If they were to suspect that we were here, they'd forget their own little squabbles at once and start killing us instead. And that, of course, would mean that they would be united for the first time in their history, and who knows how long it would take them before they'd get back to killing one another again. Well, said Ebor, you're underground now, and it can't possibly take them too much longer. One wouldn't think so, agreed Dark-Plllnk. In a way, he added, that spaceship was a hopeful sign. It means that they'll be sending a manned ship along pretty soon, and that should do the trick. As soon as one side has a base on the moon, the other side is bound to get things started. A relief for you, eh? Said Ebor. You know, said Dark-Plllnk thoughtfully, I can't help thinking I was born in the wrong age. All this scrabbling around, searching everywhere for suitable planets. Back when the universe was younger, there were lots and lots of planets to colonize. Now the old problem of half-life is taking its toll, and we can't even hope to keep up with the birth rate anymore. If it weren't for the occasional planets like that one up there, I don't know what we'd do." "Don't worry," Eeyore told him. "They'll have their atomic war pretty soon and leave us a nice high-radiation planet to colonize." "I certainly hope it's soon," said God-Plllnk. "This waiting gets on one's nerves." He rang for the orderly. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The God-Plllnk by Jerome Bixby, originally published in Worlds of Tomorrow, December 1963. Narrated by Tom Trussel. In the shadows of a crater wall on Phobos, moon of Mars, Gurg and Earl waited to greet the god. If the god continued its present rate of approach, it would land within moments. Gurg and Earl had journeyed all night with their eyes on that distant glinting speck in the sky. Over cold, crusted sand dunes and jagged crater walls they had flowed, crept, bounded, oozed toward the spot where the god must land if its course held true. Gurg was a Frishk, which is the equivalent of a high priest. Earl was a Fshg, or much higher priest. The best wishes of the people had gone with them on their tremendous mission. Now, at the place, they trembled in every tentacle as they peered upward. The rust-red orb of Mars rode the black horizon. Mars was, as Gurg and Earl had learned from their elders and now taught their youngers, the stern seeing all eye of it who was the universe. From that great eye, a day ago, had sprung a shining messenger, an emissary, a god that must be coming on a purposeful visit. It had been detected at the halfway point of its trip, but there could be no doubt regarding its origin, its nature, its destination. For in the matter of form, the god was a close replica of Gurg and Earl. Of all the creatures of their race, it was octopedal, with sinewy double tentacles and a thinking trunk, and the reproduction pouch. The only significant difference was that the god gleamed mysteriously, as if its angular, hard-line representation of normal form were cast in shining stone. As it flew, it reflected starlight, and the red glow of the universal eye behind it from its sleek surfaces. Gurg and Earl blinked their own dull-surfaced, astronomically far-sighted, rust-red eyes at each other in supreme excitement and anticipation. What would the god tell them? What would it reveal? Would it divulge the cosmic secret? Would it tell them the place and destiny of their lowly race? Had it come to punish them for not being good enough, for over-reproducing, for worshipping improperly? From a selfish standpoint, it might even tell them how to get rid of the Plllnk, a subject of constant prayer. How smoothly it flew, while Gurg and Earl and their people could bound about with a great agility in Phobos's light gravity, they could not fly. "How wonderful it would be to fly," said Earl. "Perhaps," said Gurg, "we have been found ready to be taught." Then Gurg twitched as a Plllnk bit him, just under the front left double tentacle. He combed the light further, found the Plllnk, and shredded it, casting the pieces around about so that no two of them might combine to form another Plllnk. How wonderful it would be also if the god could tell them how to get rid of the itching, crawling, parasitic Plllnk, whose bite in sufficient numbers was often fatal. The god began to land. Its short red flame downward from its mouth to the underside of its gleaming body. Red flickers and sharp-edged black shadows danced about the two who waited below. They shrank back, fearful that the display might be a disapproving communication. Yet they held their ground, knowing they had lived good lives and deserved no condemnation on any score they could imagine. The god lowered. On its belching tongue of flame, the flame that seemed a tiny part, a sliver, of the universal eye that watched. Strange marks were on the side of the god's body. They were, "First Mars Expedition, U.S. Space Force, Planet to Satellite, Crewboat number 2. The last few moments of the god's descent were quite rapid. Simultaneously, the darting red flames seemed to lessen in intensity and length. Then, at the second of impact, they brightened again to previous power. But too late. The impact was hard. Gurgen Earl gasped as one of the god's double tentacles buckled, crumpled, with a glinting of shiny hard material. The flames stopped. The god, unable to remain erect with its injury, slowly toppled. Its body thudded silently, stirring pumice dust. It was motionless. Gurgen Earl stared at each other. Was the god fatally injured? Dying? Dead? For a broken tentacle meant that fluids would seep out, and soon the dry death would occur. The god stirred. It braced 2 sets of tentacles against the ground, as if trying to push itself erect. The effort was not successful. Again it was motionless. The 2 double tentacles remained outstretched, however, and they pointed at the shadows where Gurgen Earl waited and watched. Gurgen Earl sighed in relief. The god has assumed conversation position. It must have healed its broken tentacle, truly a god. Soon it would be as good as new, for otherwise agony would forbid conversation. It was ready to address them. Now! This was the greatest moment of Gurgen Earl's lives. They waited for the god to speak. It was silent. A long time passed. The god remained motionless, though in conversation position, and silent. A very long time passed. Then a tiny hole appeared in the god's side. It grew larger, larger, and then it stopped growing larger. Something appeared at the hole. It paused, then dropped to the surface of Phobos, where it began to crawl about. It bore considerable resemblance to a Plllnk, except for its shiny wrinkled grey skin. Plllnks were purple. And this thing was huge. Huge! It was 1/5 the size of the god's body. Caught by horror and fearing the worst, Gurgen Earl waited for the god to speak. "Damn," John Cotter was thinking. "That was a neat bit of sloppiness, that landing. Carruthers will chew me out and in again." Pause. "Holy cats, I hope the radio isn't busted, or I'll have a hell of a wait before they follow up and find me." The god was dead. Killed by the giant Plllnk, a scourge from which evidently even the gods were not spared. The huge Plllnk, even now creeping around, wrinkled-skinned and detestable, its coloration the same as the gods, the most loathsome sight imaginable. A god Plllnk. Gurgen Earl moved into view from the shadows of the crater wall. Their thinking trunks tingled with misery, sorrow, bitter anger and disappointment. The Plllnk stopped, having sensed them. Then it darted for the hole it had eaten in the god. Earl moved to intercept it. The Plllnk changed course and headed swiftly up a sand dune. With a great bound, impelled by outrage, Earl was upon it, while Gurd touched tentacles with the dead god, in reverent mourning, in terrible sorrow, in loss, in supplication. Earl shredded the god Plllnk. 2 days later, a second god was detected. It silently circled Phobos from the universal eye.
It did not land. It silently circled Phobos, and then returned to the eye. Within the day it was back, in the company of 11 other gods. They landed. Joyfully mortals went forth to meet them. It was quite a battle while it lasted. Joy quickly ended as the gods died one by one, each of them showing the holes eaten in their sides by the insatiable plonks. Likewise, eventually, died all the plonks, which presumably had killed the gods. They fought with strange white flares and crackling blue flashes, which only tickled the hides of the faithful. Then they were shredded. Religious beliefs on Phobos underwent certain basic changes, such as the gods, or at least their messengers, were known not to be immortal, nor were the special variety of Plllnk which afflicted them. On Earth, 20 years afterward, word is anxiously awaited of the 4th Mars expedition.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Rabbits Have Long Ears by Lawrence F. Willard. Originally published in Worlds of If Science Fiction, August 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Commander Loja gave orders to his navigator to bring the ship in on the satellite out of sight of the prying telescopes, which no doubt existed on such an invitingly green planet. He was a cautious man, and didn't intend to lose any more crew members if he could help it. He could tell by the unusually poor handling of the ship that the crew was still demoralized from the brush with the high IQ slugs on that last planet which they had approached so directly. They'd lost 3 men in that scrap, one of them a highly valued anthropologist. There were only 2 more of those left in the freeze locker. Too bad it couldn't have been a radio operator. There were plenty of those on ice. The commander's thoughts were interrupted by a second officer who entered without the customary military burp. "I'll forgive you this time, Montresig," said the commander, "but we can't relax regulations now, can we? Anything new to report on this planet?" "No, your loftiness," said Montresig, after giving a belated burp. "There's nothing to add to what we already know, but then we've just come to rest on this clinker of a moon. I don't imagine, however, that we've located our long-lost ancestors or our mythical home planet. There doesn't seem to be a race in this galaxy that walks upright on 2 good legs with 2 arms, 2 eyes, nose, mouth, and other standard equipment." "Could be we'll find one this time," said the commander. "We know it's an oxygen planet, and that there are intelligent beings there, judging from the cities we can see and their use of radio." "Maybe," grumbled Montresig, "but they won't be men. If they're not slugs, they'll be talking fish, or intellectual spiders, or something equally repulsive. And I can tell you one thing, whatever we find, if it has brains, it will want to fight." "Now, Montresig, don't be bitter. We've only examined a couple 100 planets. There are many more, and you know we'll have to take a look at as many as we can. I tell you, however, we won't take any more chances. Unless we find out they're pretty much like us, we won't go near the damn planet." "How do you propose to find that out, your loftiness? We can't see anything that small by telescope. We haven't learned much so far by listening to them, and it's pretty dangerous business using the dredge." "Ah, my dear Montresig, the crux of the matter is that we can tell about them, I believe, from listening to them. Judging from the reports I got from communications, this is the talkingest planet in the galaxy. That utilizes the entire radio spectrum we know, and, I suspect, some portions of it we don't know. All they do is talk. There must be millions of individuals on that planet jabbering in a dozen different languages.
Our language technicians have decoded 2 of the major tongues already and have fed the information to the main computer. All radio signals in those languages are now being fed directly to the computer, and the information is being classified and cross-referenced. Montresig's furry countenance brightened. "Then we won't have to send down the dredge?" "I hope not, Montresig. I do not like to bring strange life forms aboard the ship. Remember planet 187 in the Zorgid system?" Montresig shuddered. "I'll never forget. When that monster materialized in the hold, I snapped on the stasis field and it had no effect. I tried every last trick in the bag, including 7 kinds of poison gas. Luckily, the dredge operator was able to catch him and throw him back where he came from, but the hold was a shambles and 2 men had to have expensive repair work." "Well," said the commander, "I don't like the dredge at all, but I suppose it's better than landing and having to do battle with slugs. I swear I was certain there was no intelligent life on that planet. By the way, I'm having an anthropologist thawed out now. That leaves only 1 more in the freeze locker, and we can't operate without one. Take care nothing happens to him, Montresig." Commander Lozier made the sign of dismissal, and Montresig burped gracefully and withdrew. The commander signalled communications. After a considerable delay, a burp sounded from the speaker on the wall, and a voice announced, "Tronriff here. May I serve your loftiness?" "Tronriff," said the commander. "The delay is inexcusable. Does the computer have its belly full yet?" "Your loftiness, the reference tapes are full, but the machine is unable to present a full picture of the dominant life form. It appears, however, they are much like us in general body shape. Unfortunately, we can get no reference point from which to judge their size. They're exceedingly ferocious and bloodthirsty, and apparently war among themselves continuously." "I'm tempted to leave now," said the commander. "I'll have to use the dredge, I suppose. Are you sure it won't do some good to listen to their communications a while longer?" The speaker was silent for a moment. Then Tronriff spoke. "I don't like to mention this, your loftiness, but my engineers have found several unidentified types of emission besides those carrying speech frequencies. They think that one particular type characterized by an extremely broad frequency range just might be transmission of visual images." "I don't believe it," said the commander. "We've been trying to do that for hundreds of years without success, and so far as we've never found another race in the galaxy as far advanced technologically as our own. These people don't even have space flight." "They have artificial satellites up," said Tronriff. "We're monitoring signals from one, and from what I gather, they're apt to have something up on this moon before long." "Any chance of finding out how they transmit visual images? If they really do?" "Not a chance," said Tronriff. "My engineers can't even conceive of a device that could convert these signals into a picture." "That's all, Tronriff. Notify Montresig that is to meet me immediately in the dredge room with the anthropologist and a dredge operator." The commander sighed. What irony that the only truly peaceful race in the galaxy should be the only one to discover interstellar flight. For 4,000 years the Ka had had their ships and had colonized hundreds of planets until they had lost track on which one they started from. In all that time they had avoided planets with intelligent life, had never found any other ships in space. Now, thought the commander, we have to go looking for trouble just to satisfy our curiosity as to where we started from. Montresig introduced the newly thawed anthropologist to him on the dredge room balcony, and Commander Lozier briefed him on the importance of his job. "We don't believe this race has any connection with ours," said the commander. "It's too savage. And yet we haven't found another race as far advanced in science, nor one that appears to be so similar to ours. Our problem is to find out a little more about them, their physical size, whether it's safe to contact them, which I personally doubt." "Is it your intention to bring back one of these intelligent beings with the dredge?" asked the anthropologist. "You know better than that, or maybe you don't," said the commander. "Anyway,
You should know that it is against our code of ethics to cause harm to any intelligent being. That dredge is set to reject any living creature capable of a high order of thought, and that control is sealed against our use. The idea is to bring back artifacts that might tell us something about the people of the planet. Maybe they have a written language, and have something that approximates our scrolls. Maybe they have drawings. I'd especially like to snag one of the visual image receptors our communications engineers think they have. "The dredge operator is ready," said Montresig. "The computer controls have been switched to this balcony, and the stasis beam has been checked." Commander Loja looked up at the dredge operator in his glassed-in booth high on the opposite wall of the hold. He gave a quick hand signal and transferred his attention to the floor of the vast hold below him. A shimmering mistiness began to form in the center of the floor. Commander Loja could feel the tension of his companions as they waited. It was a blind grab. The dredge operator had no way of knowing what would be scooped up at the end of his force beam. Slowly, the mistiness grew more dense, darkening to an impenetrable cloud, and then vanished with an audible snap, leaving a strange alien mechanism on the floor of the hold. It resembled a huge cylinder resting on tractor-like treads. From the balcony, the men scurrying across the floor seemed dwarfed by the object. Unheeding of any danger, they swarmed over it, measuring, testing, amassing information to be fed to the computer. "Holy ghosts of my departed ancestors!" gasped Montresig. "What is it?" "You know about as much about it as I do, my dear fellow," the commander said. "As soon as the engineers get through poking at it, we'll find out what the computer thinks it is." "I'll bet it's a weapon of some sort," said Montresig. "They're almost always fighting down there, according to the data we have. There's frequent mention of a device called a hydrogen bomb. If it's what I think it is, I have no desire to visit them in person." A figure detached itself from the group of men surrounding the huge contrivance and came hurrying to the elevator entrance beneath the balcony. In a moment he appeared on the balcony, burped perfunctorily, and handed Commander Loja several sheets of script. The commander read them into a microphone grill which was part of the remote panel feeding into the main computer. He waited until a red light glowed, indicated that the material had been integrated. He pressed a stud and spoke into the microphone again. "Classify," he said. "Information in storage banks reveals object to be a gun," said the loudspeaker. "Gun, an instrument variously known as revolver, heater, rod, Betsy, automatic, typewriter, gat, which refer to carried by gunmen, cowboys, mobsters, killers, cons, doughboys, cops, G-men, marines, gangsters, and kids, which refer to weapon fires projectile known as bullet, lead, shell, slug, which refer to solid projectile pierces body of individual causing serious injury and death. It is used with that intention. No information on size of instrument previous to captured specimen, which is nearly 14 zeng, about 5 1/4 man lengths long. Sample excerpt demonstrating use. Blinky snapped the gun from his holster and fired from the hip. Sound of explosion. The big cowpoke grabbed at his chest, and blood spurted between his fingers. With a look of surprise on his face, he slumped to the bar-room floor. "What do you make of that?" asked the commander. "I'd have been surprised too," said Montresig. "The bloodthirsty giants," said the anthropologist. "If that's a pocket weapon, they'd be so big you couldn't get one into this hold." "I don't believe it," said the commander. "I think there's something wrong somewhere. Possibly guns come in various sizes. This could be a stationary weapon, perhaps, to blow buildings apart instead of people, though I can't figure out why anybody would want to. I'm going to send the dredge back once more to make sure we aren't being misled." "I think you're wrong," said Montresig. "All evidence does point to a race of giants, evil creatures at best, even if maybe they do have 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth like us.
Not that I don't think it is a good idea to send the dredge back," he added hastily at the sight of Commander Logier's glowering countenance. The commander signalled to the dredge operator again, and they waited while he returned the gun to wherever he got it, and fished for something else from the surface of the green planet. The anthropologist cleared his throat. "You can't deny that the telescope shows us the most gigantic cities to be found anywhere in the galaxy." "That doesn't necessarily mean that the inhabitants are physically large, only that there may be a lot of them," said the commander. "Or both?" Their attention turned to the floor of the hold as the opaque cloud rapidly grew darker and vanished again with a snap. Montresig's reaction was the same as before. "Great shades of my holy ancestors," he said. "What is it?" "It is assuredly an animal," said the commander, "not unlike some we have on our own planets. I'll have the biologist and medics examine it." He turned to the anthropologist. "You go too, Alphys." The animal, which had appeared stunned when it first appeared, now began to turn around, making clicking noises on the floor. As the men approached it from all directions, it looked about nervously, opened its mouth to show some glistening teeth, and proceeded to make a long, harsh noise. Alphys made the mistake of approaching too closely to the beast, which wheeled and kicked him head over heels some distance away. Montresig touched a red button on the railing, and stasis beams converged on the animal, freezing it instantly. It toppled over and lay stiffly on the floor of the hold. Alphys dragged himself to his feet and shouted up to the balcony, "Ask the computer about animals with long ears." The commander spoke into the microphone again. "Four-legged animal, long ears, classify." "Rabbit," said the computer. "An animal variously known as bunny, hare, coney, Peter, Uncle Wiggly, strong rear legs, progresses over ground erratically, consumes vegetation, multiplies with great rapidity, lays egg at Easter time. It is generally considered timid and is hunted for food. Sample excerpt demonstrating relationship. Lon climbed over the stone wall and continued across the woodlot towards his cabin, the carcasses of 3 rabbits slung over his shoulder. There would be rabbit stew tonight." "Holy gods in their celestial quarters," said Montresig. "Did you hear that? Is there any question in your mind now about the size and ferocity of these people?" "Considerable," said the commander. "That computer has made mistakes before. Witness that last planet. Those were supposed to be garden snails, those slugs that gave us such a walloping. I don't think we can get the right information through to it." "But your loftiness," wailed Montresig. "Everything adds up. You can see for yourself. The giant cities, they're warring on each other. The information the computer gave us. It isn't safe to land on that planet." "No, I suppose not," sighed the commander. "But do you realize the implications? Here we have a highly advanced race just ready to take off into space. And according to our information, they are savage, war-making giants. If I bring that news back, our supreme goodness is apt to issue orders to evacuate several hundred planets and move to some other galaxy. Let's try the dredge once more." Commander signaled the dredge operator, and waited a reasonable length of time before it was informed that something was wrong with it, and that it would be some time before repairs could be made. "I give up," said Commander Logier. "I have orders not to land on a questionable planet, and I've learned my lesson. Either that computer has a few loose connections, or those people are broadcasting pure nonsense. I just don't believe in giants, much less in scientific ones. Get ready to leave, Montresig, and see that you make an accurate written report of this whole situation." "What do we do with the animal, your loftiness?" "The dredge is busted. So what do you think we can do with it? Heave it out the airlock. It can stay here on the moon until the first explorers come up from the planet, which won't be long, and they can have rabbit stew." The great ship lifted from the dark moonscape, leaving behind the frozen form of the first Earth being to have crossed space, A surprise for the crew of the first manned moon rocket, if not the makings of rabbit stew. Somewhere, 1,000,000 miles beyond the sun, the ship accelerated rapidly. The commander looked up from his desk as Montresig entered smartly with a precision burp. "Alphys is back in the freeze locker and repairs are going forward on the dredge, but it'll be a long job." "It doesn't matter," said the commander. "We're going home. I'm committed to bringing back a report on this planet now, but I don't like it and will advise further study of it by other expeditions before any desperate measures are taken, such as evacuating the galaxy." "It's funny about that rabbit," said Montresig. "I noticed as we shoved it out the lock that it had semicircles of some hard metal, probably iron, nailed to its feet." "That is peculiar," said the commander. "Almost like the shoes we attach to the feast's hooves before children ride them. Just for the fun of it, Montresig, why don't we give that information to the computer and see what it says?" "Can't," said Montresig. "I wiped the memory tanks clean. I don't think it means much anyway. A rabbit's a rabbit, shoes or no shoes." The commander nodded, and Montresig burped and withdrew.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. Master Race by Richard Ashby. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, September 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. One moment he was piloting a fast plane over dangerous green jungles, and the next Eddie was wide awake and peering through the gloom. Across the room Rags was whining softly and sniffing the damp night air that rolled in through the open window. The Scotty was excited, Eddie saw, and it must be something out of the ordinary, for Rags' whimpering carried an undercurrent of perplexity and fear, and the dog wasn't a coward. The boy called softly to him, but Rags, after tossing back a swift glance of recognition, put his forefeet up on the sill and peered, muttering, out across the pastures. Eddie slipped from his bed and padded over to the window. As he comfortingly ruffled the fur behind the Scotty's ears, he listened intently at the night. At first he heard only the ordinary country sounds, roosters crowing over at the next farm, the muffled thumping of stock shifting about in the barn, and against the corral fence, the flittering and high chirping of birds in the cottonwoods and pepper trees. He took the dog in his arms, and was about to go back to bed with him when he became aware of a sound that was very much out of the ordinary. A sound, Eddie decided, something like standing outside the Baptist church in Riverside when the organist was playing low, vibrant notes inside. Eddie wondered how he could have first missed the sound, so firmly had it now become established. Where could it be coming from? It was, he guessed, about an hour till dawn, and no tractors or other farm machinery should be running. And it wasn't a radio. A plane? Leaning from the window, he glanced upwards, then gasped in astonishment. Goose pimples of excitement tingled his skin, for there in the sky, above the oak tree on the ridge, hung a pattern of sharp white lights. There were little lights, as if someone had strung together a fanciful arrangement of Christmas tree bulbs, then set them dangling aloft beneath a kite. Rags' mutterings became deep and angry. Finally he gave vent to a short, sharp bark. Instantly Eddie quieted the dog. Lights or not, his mother had made it plenty clear about Rags being in the house. Crouching on the floor, both arms about Rags, Eddie whispered words of reassurance while he stared up at the strange sparklings. The oak tree, the one with its tree house, was a scant quarter-mile from where he knelt, and he wondered if it was being so high on the ridge had caused it to draw some sort of lightning to itself. He'd read of that happening. Chain lightning. Or was it called foxfire? Eddie couldn't remember. Anyway, it looked something like that, he imagined. But no lightning, he remembered, made a noise like a machine. Unconsciously, he hooked sight and sound together. Frowning, Eddie let go of the dog. If the lights had been over the barn or garage, he had gone to tell his father, or over the garden, his mother. But the treehouse didn't concern them. It was his, and even if it hadn't been an hour before dawn, he wouldn't have told his parents. He had things in there he shouldn't have, and it wouldn't do for either mother or father to go snooping around, even if they couldn't find his secret ladder and climb it. He returned to the window. Something thrashed in the highest branches of the oak. Rags began his whining again. There was but one thing to do. He found his moccasins by the night table and pulled them on, threw a leather jacket on over his pyjamas. From the wall above his desk, Eddie took down his .22, broke it, slipped in a shell, and tiptoed from the house. The humming was stronger outside, not louder exactly, but more easy to feel. He crouched down, the way he'd seen commandos do in pictures, and began to run, holding the rifle at ready before him. And for once, Rags seemed content to stay at his side and not go dashing along ahead up the path. As they took the turn by the big rock, a startled night bird plunged out of the bushes and took wing. The bird's violent rush brought caution to Eddie, and he slowed his run to a walk. Suppose, he thought, that someone in a helicopter, or maybe a balloon, was hanging over the treehouse. Spies, probably. And suppose they wanted the treehouse for a headquarters. He stopped, looked back down at the house dimly outlined in the starlight. Suppose, he continued, that there were too many of them. He'd just better sneak up quiet and see what was going on. He eased himself around another turn in the path and came again in view of the oak. The lights were still there, but they no longer looked to be mere points of brightness against an empty sky. He stopped, more puzzled than ever. They looked like navigation lights on a ship, and a couple of them like the glow from inside a radio, and all of them were swaying gently in the night wind, 20 feet or so above the tree. Rags went slowly ahead, 2 feet, 3, 4, then stopped, belly almost to the dust. His teeth shone in a soundless snarl, not a muscle of his body moving. Eddie had never seen him act like this, not even when the bear had come down into the valley to raid for chickens. Rags was plainly terrified, and something of the dog's emotion communicated itself. The boy bit his lip grimly, then strained to listen, heard what the dog was hearing. Someone, something, was moving about up in the oak. Some of his fear gave way to anger. Messing about in my treehouse? He gripped the rifle tightly, took 2 determined steps forward. The third step he never completed. He was unconscious when he pitched into the ground, and when Rags leapt after him, he too crumpled as if dead. The commander left his report-strewn desk and strode heavily over to the forward port. Glumly he looked down at the frosty, pitted surface of the satellite 1,000 miles away, and in his imagination saw the planet that swung on the dead orb's opposite side. It was nonsense to have to hide behind a moon from such a primitive planet, waiting and waiting like a coward for reassuring information. But such prudence had ever been part of holy law. He sighed, turned away from the huge wall of window. Sometimes one wondered about law, he mused darkly. One did not disobey, of course, but one could not help wondering sometimes, and occasionally one even wondered the blackest heresy of all. Was it really important to kill all life everywhere for the sake of colonization? The commander caught sight of his reflection in a polished door panel. His own hard eyes glowered out from the reflection accusingly, so he pulled up his shoulders and put all suspicion from his mind. Would he not destroy any of his people for such thoughts? Then he must not allow himself to entertain such blasphemy. Naturally, colonization was all important. That was law. Picking up the pictures taken when they had first flashed into this system, the commander saw again the nature of the beings they were about to exterminate. That they were ignorant savages, quite unworthy of the usual precautions now being taken, was plain to see. Their atmosphere showed heavy traces of carbon combustion, a certain indication that the creatures were inefficient, for who but a savage would burn matter to obtain power? The amount of radioactivity present in their gaseous envelope was so tiny as to prove that they had little or no knowledge of atomic power. There were no Frel vibrations apparent. Imagine existing without an understanding of simple magnetics. He picked up an enlargement of one portion of a landmass, put a hand magnetic lens over it. The magnification showed clusters of dwellings linked together by lines and double lines upon the ground. Certainly the ultimate proof of low-order civilization, when beings chose to live clustered together, commuting by land, when they could spread themselves out over the surface of the planet and use the roads of the sky. The commander made a sign in the air with his fingers, and a door popped open at the end of the vast room. An aide ran towards the desk, halted, covered his face in salute. "Sir?" "How long has the scout been gone?" The aide removed his hands from his eyes. "A day and a night, sir. He should be back any time now." "Fool!" the commander roared out the word. "Did I ask for your guesses? I know he's due back. He is, in fact, 1 hour overdue." He did not know if this was or was not true, but it was good discipline policy. "Lock him away when he arrives." The other covered his face respectfully. "Yes, sir." He turned, ran from the desk and out the door. For a few minutes the commander kept busy by calling the 10 ray centers of the 3-mile-long ship, demanding to know if they were ready to beam. They were. He then spent a while ordering all unit leaders to hold their sections in readiness for inertialess drive. The unit leaders protested politely that they were. He called engine, commanded that they look sharp. Meekly they assured him that all was well. With only small satisfaction, the commander rose from his desk, paced slowly over to the port again. As he gazed out at the moon's bland surface, he reflected that there was something about this 9-planet system they were in that made him edgy, made him want to keep active and alert. And where was that thrice-blasted scout? He decided to have him flogged when he returned. Good discipline policy. The scout woke from his drunken sleep and glanced at the clock on the dash of his little craft. It was very late, he saw. He would have to think of a fine excuse when he returned, or they would put him in truth and learn that all scouts took the precious freedom of voyagers to become intoxicated for a while. Not much time. He would have to take what he could find in the vicinity. Small difference it made, though, since the beings of the planet were surely doomed. The scout yawned, then lifted the ship from the mountain and arrowed it down into the folds of the valley. His visor translated the immediate night into light, showing him the typically repugnant surface features of a Type J planet. Foliage, sharp young geology, water flowing in natural beds, a world like 100 others he'd visited in the name of law. When the floor of the valley came up, he levelled off, then silently sped along in search of dwellings. Beneath him, on level stretches of land, stood odd 4-legged creatures. The dominants of this world, he wondered. Probably not. The extremities of their limbs appeared to be too blunt and crude to do even the simple tooling he'd noticed during his flight in. Beasts of transport, no doubt. Boldly he swooped low over a group, scattering them in panic. The meadow ended with almost sheer mountain wall, and the scout whipped his craft up its face and down the opposite side. Something flickered in his vision screen, and he swung the controls. A dwelling. In a moment he was back over it, hanging motionless. Sure enough, a revolting crude shack that nestled high in the branches of one of this world's surface growths. This was it. There was no time nor need to search further. He locked the controls, then turned on the deadly screen that would kill all life directly beneath, save one probably shielded, such as himself, and would stun all life attempting to enter the edges of the field. Pulling on his helmet, the scout reached to the stud at his belt and reduced his weight to but a fraction of itself. Then he opened the hatch and clambered out into the air. His first few minutes of exploration in the treehouse were disappointing. There was no life, no corpses about for him to dissect and study. But the hunting club puzzled him. Obviously tooled by machinery and scuffed from much killing, it bore what might be a word blunt into its thickened end. Spaulding. He realized he was in an extremely primitive section of the planet, for this weapon was, no doubt, a trade article from some more advanced portion of the globe. Too bad he'd had to land in this region. Dull. The club he chucked into the bag over his shoulder. A round object, made of some fairly soft material, with seams twisting over its surface, next caught his eye. He took it up, shook it. It too bore the symbol, Spaulding. Probably a totem word, perhaps the sign of this particular tribe. He put it with the club. It was followed by a small package of soft white cylinders which were stuffed with crumbles of dried weed. Each cylinder bore the sign, Camel, as did the container, which also showed a beast somewhat like those he had buzzed. And beyond that there was nothing. A simple people indeed, he pondered. He was about to leave when he noticed the stack of artifacts in one corner. The scout bent to examine them. They seemed to be composed of the same material as the white of the camel cylinders, but thicker and bound together in long, wide, flat construction. There were bright colours on the outside of each, and just as he discovered that the individual leaves of material could be separated and turned, the alarm bell sounded twice in his helmet. Life had blundered into the outer edges of his field. Hastily the scout put a score of his latest finds into his sack and left the treehouse, and without bothering to search for the life that had triggered his alarm, law specified a scout was to flee in such an instance. He adjusted his weight and rowed up to his waiting ship. Minutes later, he had passed the world satellite and was in view of his parent craft. The commander's first action was to order the scout flogged before his comrades as an example of what awaited those who became lax in the performance of important duties. His second was to assemble the council of experts. When the 8 old men had taken their places about the table, the commander saluted them in the name of law, then summoned his aide. "Is decontamination through?" "It is, sir." "Then have the findings brought in." The officer ran from the room and returned in a moment with the scout's bulging sack. Gently he placed it in the centre of the round table before the council. After saluting, he took his leave again. "Gentlemen," began the commander, "we are met again to pass judgment on a corrupt, life-harbouring planet. By the authority vested in me through the line of my father, I charge you with the voice of law." And so on, with the ancient words of the ritual. The 8 old experts hardly listened. They had sat through countless identical sessions during the hundreds of years of their lives. Theirs was but to view the oddities that would presently be arranged before them, make mental records of their descriptions, and offer 1 or 2 tentative guesses as to the nature of the articles. But in any event, the action that followed would be the same. The creatures responsible for the articles would shortly be snuffed out, in the glorious and awful name of law. So they hardly listened. When the commander had finished with the rites of the occasion, he unsnapped the bag, and after peering within it, gingerly brought out the scout's first find. Only now did the old men appear to take much notice. A few even leant forward slightly. All eyes centred on what their commander held. "A phallic object?" asked the youngest. "No, a lever," said the eldest. "For killing," added the next. "But it was made by machine," put in a fourth. For a moment they were silent. The commander placed the machine-made killing lever on the table. It described a short little half-roll, bringing the printing into view.
"A religious design," said the youngest, "obviously pagan, but rather well worked." No one found anything further to say, so the commander brought forth from the bag the next object. A mild flurry of interest ensued when it was discovered that this soft globular thing bore the same religious design, but the sages would not venture an opinion as to the thing's purpose. So the commander took out the package of white cylinders. Only the next to the eldest made any comment. He claimed that he had seen such articles in his youth, brought out from a system for 3 worlds that swung above a nova. The white things there, he reminisced, were units of value, useful in bartering. They were designed to be spent quickly, lest the stuffing fall out. The other experts agreed that these were no doubt also monies. The commander had been listening with but half an ear. Privately, he had long considered the experts to be but a muttering pack of senile dolts, dead weight, useless cargo on the ship. They worked not, neither did they breed, but law demanded their presence. The law, he mused, seemed strange at times. He discovered the council was waiting for him. Frowning to cover his embarrassment, he took out the last of the scouts' finds. For a moment all of them were struck by the bright colours on the flat surface. The one old man reached out a trembling hand. "Records!" he murmured incredulously. "Records such as our own race is said to have once made, long, long ago, before law." Reverently he examined the cover, then with remarkable agility for one so decrepit, he jumped to his feet and flung the thing from him. His face twitched with horror. The others, shocked and disbelieving, fell to examining the rest of the new articles. In a moment, cries of alarm filled the council room. Chairs were upset, dignity forgotten. Only the eldest retained his composure, although with difficulty, for he could hardly manage to control the palsied shaking of his hands. The astonished commander leaned over his shoulder and watched as the ancient turned the pages. What he saw made the blood drum in his ears, made his vision swim, and only faintly did he hear the old one's croaking words, "Praise to law, which we so carelessly accepted, for law has saved us from the fiendish denizens of this planet. Had we attempted to exterminate them, their space armadas would have taken instant revenge, for they are obviously mightier than we." He put down the bright record of spacecraft vaster than the one which they occupied and took up another. On its cover was depicted a world being blasted into flaming wreckage, and within was shown the pictorial history of a space fleet engaged in repelling an alien invasion, and who followed up their successful repulse by annihilating the entire system of the aliens. 5 more of the record books did they examine before the commander's stunned mind at last reeled beneath the hideous concepts, and it could look no more. Dumbly he managed to reach the phones and order the ship through into emergency drive to some far and lost point in space and dimension. And as he waited for the shuddering wrench that signaled interdimensional shift, he tried to forget the horrors they had so narrowly escaped. Creatures who could make themselves invisible, who had mastered space travel, who worked in magic more powerful than that of laws, who could whiff out entire solar systems, who could survive incredible mishaps and hardships. Creatures who were no less than gods. A wave of fear tore at the commander as the glittering moon faded away. Eternal nothingness of grey enclosed the ship. The sun was up when Eddie recovered consciousness. Stiff and cold, he sat and looked around sleepily for a moment before remembering. Then, as he saw Rags sitting before him, tail wagging happily, it all began to come back. Last night, sometime, humming lights above the tree-house, someone moving about up there, himself sneaking up to see, then nothing. He must have tripped and knocked himself out, somehow. Eddie snatched up the .22 and aimed it at the tree. "Whoever's up there," he said, getting to his feet, "had better come on out." Nothing happened. Eddie bent down cautiously, his eyes still fixed on the tree-house. picked up a rock and hurled it through the shanty's open door. A bird fluttered from the gnarled oak, sailed across the morning meadow, chirping angrily. "This is your last chance. Come on out, or I'm coming up and get you." The bird's being there made him quite sure that everything was all right, so after a moment he pulled the knotted rope from its concealment in a cleft of the tree and went up hand over hand. A strange odour lingered inside the shack. Something like... Eddie sniffed, frowned. Something like a freshly blown fuse, but outside of that nothing seemed amiss at first. Then he discovered his softball and bat were missing. He found he didn't care too much. The season was over anyway, and besides, hunting and riding and fishing were more fun. He looked further. The cigarettes! He hoped the thief wouldn't snitch on him to Dad. But that didn't make too much sense, he realized. The thief, a tramp probably, was far away by now, maybe at this very minute trying to trade the ball and bat for a meal or a drink. And those humming lights, even now he wasn't too sure he'd seen them. Stars probably. The Little Dipper, or maybe fireflies, or lightning. Sure. He turned to go. The sun told him it was almost 7 o'clock. Mother would be furious if he found him out in the morning without having dressed properly or eaten. It was then he saw that something else was missing, but because it was so late he didn't stop to worry. Mandrake the magician, the Invisible Boys, Buck Rogers, Batman. They were all old comic books. He'd finished with them months ago. Eddie clambered down the rope, and seconds later he and Rags were joyfully racing along the trail that led to home. It was a beautiful morning.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. I mean, why not? It's free. It's just a little click.